Hello everybody! Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial about doing inkjet image transfers with polymer clay. What you see right now is all you're going to need to do it, plus a little container of water. So you really don't need too much. The most important thing you're going to need is the translucent liquid Sculpey. I haven't tried this with other liquid polymer clays. I just know that the TLS works. So that's what I use. The scissors you're going to need for after you bake it. You may have a little bit of excess around the edges, so this is just for trimming. The brush is to apply the liquid Sculpey. And then you'll need a piece of light colored polymer clay rolled out in your pasta machine to whatever thickness you would like. I'm going to be using this bezel, so I kind of looked at how thick that was and eyeballed a piece of polymer clay so that it would fit flat in the bezel. So this is at a number 6 on my pasta machine, which is right about the middle. It's a Amico pasta machine. It's one of the ones that you can get at Michael's. It's not anything fancy, but it's a number 6. That's what I rolled it out on. You don't want it too thin because you'll have to rub the piece later, and you don't want it to crack when you're doing that. You'll also need an image. So this is the image that I'm going to be using. It's, as you can see, pretty dark, but you're going to need it to be dark in order for it to transfer properly. I find that if you try to do pastels or really light images, a lot of it gets lost in the process, like it doesn't transfer very well. I have access to Photoshop, so I went ahead and really saturated the color in this image, and I printed it out at the highest quality that my printer will let me do. So it used more ink than it normally would. So you need a really good image to do this with. Also, low resolution images don't tend to transfer well. They just don't look good. So print at the highest quality and highest resolution you can. And you don't necessarily have to print it exactly the shape that you're going to need. Like I said, I use Photoshop, so I was able to crop it down to the exact shape and size that I wanted. You can always trim it or sand it down later, or after you print your image, you can always cut it to the right size. It's really up to you and what equipment you have available to you. So the first step in this process is applying a very thin layer of the translucent liquid Sculpey directly to your image. Also, you want to print the image in reverse. That's very important. I almost forgot. So you want to make sure you print it in reverse because you're going to apply the clay over the top of this, but it's going to be this way. So always print it in reverse. So you're going to apply a very thin layer of liquid Sculpey. My bottle's 2/3 of the way to empty, so it doesn't want to come out. And I mean a very thin layer, to the point where there's almost, barely any on there. So I might use, like that might be twice as much as I need, but we'll see when I spread it out. I just use a beat up old brush. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. It kind of levels itself out as you go. And don't worry about going over the edge of the image, because that's what the scissors are for later. You can just cut off any of the excess liquid Sculpey that you have. But you should be able to see right through the liquid Sculpey. You just want to make sure that you have it all the way over to the edges and that the entire image is covered. See, because I missed a little spot right there and I can see that I did. But you just want a very thin layer and you want it to be even. So that's about all you're going to need. And if I hold this up again, you'll see, you can see right through it. It almost looks like there's none on there at all. So, I mean, you want a really thin layer. I can see I missed a little spot up near the top now that I see it in the light. So I'm just going to spread it out a little bit more. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here and make sure I've got it all covered, and I do now. So now I'm ready to apply my piece of clay to the image. So like I said, I rolled this out on a number 6 on my pasta machine. It's not too thick, but it's thick enough that it'll stand up to the rubbing that we're going to do. And then you just place it over the image. And you want to give it a little press just to make sure it's sticking. And then I turn it over and I lightly burnish it with my finger just to make sure that the image is really sticking down to that clay. Anywhere it doesn't stick or isn't pressed down very well isn't going to transfer. So you want to make sure that you've got that pressed down really well. And I can see that there's a little bit I'm not quite getting, so I'm going to smush the clay. Let's see here. Slide it over a little bit. And again, just burnish it until you feel like that image is really, all of it's really sticking down to the clay. I might overdo it a little bit. But you don't have to press down really hard. Just make sure that it's sticking. Like if you feel any air bubbles, make sure you rub them out. Like there's one right there. And you'll almost be able to see the image through the paper just because the liquid Sculpey does soak in a bit when you're burnishing it down. And of course it's going to stick, so I'm going to have to press it back down over there. I probably should have just burnished that on this piece of glass, because that's what I'm going to bake it on anyway, but I decided to do it on the wax paper so the edge of it came up. But just go ahead and, like I said, burnish it really well. There's no such thing as overdoing it. It's not going to hurt it if you do. You might smush the clay out a little bit. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. There's a little lip of white, but I'll just sand that off at the end because I smushed it a little bit when I was burnishing it. I just wanted to bring that a little bit closer to the camera so you could see that you can almost see the image right through the paper. And that's what you want to see when it's been burnished down enough, is that you can basically see right through it. Like in person, you can see that a lot better than you can on the camera. But once you've gone ahead and burnished that down, you can bake your piece for the normal amount of time. I'm going to bake this one for an hour because that's what I typically do. If you don't want to bake it as long as that, or if you don't usually do that, feel free. But like I said, I bake it at the recommended temperature for an hour. Okay, so now we've baked our piece and we've gone ahead and let it cool, and I've had it soaking in this little container of water for a few minutes just to soften up the paper a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and start rubbing and removing the paper, and you have to be very gentle when you do that. You don't want to just rub as hard as you can to get it off really quickly. This is going to be a very slow process to get the paper off. And as an example, I have one here where I rubbed way too hard and I actually took some of the liquid Sculpey and the ink right off. So if you can see that, this is an example of what happens when you rub too hard. You'll ruin your image. So just remember that you don't rub too hard. Now this one that's in the water right now was my backup because I was afraid I was going to rub one of them too hard, which I do sometimes. And this one's going to look a little different because I put gold leaf behind the image, in between the clay and the liquid Sculpey. So it's going to have a little different of an appearance. Okay, so now it is completely dry, and the next step is to add one more very thin layer of liquid Sculpey. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I really do need to get more. And this layer can be a little thicker than the one you put on before, but you still want it pretty thin because you want it to be as translucent as possible. It's never going to be perfectly clear, but that's kind of, you know, your goal. You want it to be as clear as possible. And again, you don't need very much. Just make sure that the entire surface is covered. Add a little more up here. And then you're going to go ahead and bake that again. Maybe another 15 or 20 minutes it would take. I don't bake it again for a full hour. It's not really necessary. Just once the translucent liquid Sculpey is clear, you can go ahead and take it out of the oven. It doesn't take very long because it's such a thin layer. Sometimes it'll take, you know, like I said, 10 to 15 minutes. If I'm a little heavy-handed with it, it might take half an hour, but usually it's like 10-15 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and bake this again, and I will be back once it's done. Okay, so I decided to go back to the white background clay. I made another one just because I thought, well, why not? So here's the finished product. Well, sort of finished. I haven't put it in the bezel yet, but this I sprayed with resin. It's really neat spray resin. It just kind of seals it. It's been sanded down, so the top I just used 800 grit and then 1000 grit, and I very lightly sanded it. And then the edges I left kind of rough because it's not going to matter. I'm going to embellish around the edge of the image with some lace and maybe some colored liquid Sculpey. But you can see how the image transferred. It looks pretty good in person. It looks a little lighter because my lighting isn't the best in this room. But I'm going to end up putting it in this bezel. So you get the idea here. So it's going to look something like this, with maybe some lace up the left side, maybe some little pearls or beads on the right, just to make it a little more interesting. But now you get the general idea of what I do for my inkjet image transfers. Give it a try, see if you like it. Let me know what you think. Have a good day.